Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, our today's topic for discussion is methodology of econometrics research. In lecture number 1, we discuss in detail the introduction to econometrics, in which we define the econometrics as a field in which the economic theories are verified through mathematical and statistical tools. We also discussed an example there, that was law of demand. In our today's lecture, we will extend that lecture and discuss how econometric works. What is the methodology of econometric research? If you have a problem, an issue in economics, in management, then how will you proceed to solve that problem with the help of the econometrics? So, dear students, as we discussed in the previous lecture, first of all, a theory is presented, or there we have a statement of the theory. For example, if we are interested in determinants of demand, you want to know what are the determinants of demand, so it is an issue. We can use the methodology of econometric research to find the determinants of demand. Similarly, the determinants of supply can be another example of the statement of the theory. Students, another important step is the specification of the model. It is a very important step because if you made a mistake here, if you have misspecified the model, then it will create many econometric issues in the results in the estimation of the parameters. So, what is specification of the model? In the specification of the model, we identify the variables of the study which can be included in the model. The size, and we should know about the size and magnitude. We identify the dependent and independent variable, and we transform the theory into mathematical form. So these are some few steps of the specification of the model. That what we do in the specification of model. The specification of the model means to specify, to identify the variables included in the model, then take variable of your interest, then specify which one is the dependent variable and which one is the independent variable, and then transform the theory into mathematical form. Let us discuss the steps one by one, out of which the first one is the variables of the model. We know that, as we discussed in the first step, that first an economic theory is presented. We have a statement of the theory. We are taking here the determinants of demand. So if we take the example of determinants of demand, then suppose we want to know the determinants of demand. So the variables which can affect the demand we can have a list of variables. In the specification of the model, we specify the variables. For example, the quantity demanded, the price P0 means the price of substitute, Y means income, T the taste and preferences, W weather conditions, quality, etc. There can be a number of location. So there can be a number of, what we do, that first we have specified the variables, that these can be the expected variables which can affect the demand. So after we cannot include all these variables into our model due to some limitations. So what we do, that we usually take the variables of our interest. The variables of interest means the variables which you see are more important. For example, in this case, we have taken the price of the substitute, income, and tests, where you have discussed in the previous lecture as well, that here the P means price the P naught P naught is actually, we can say, this is a price of substitute Y is the income and T is tests. So after the identification of the variables, after the specification of the variables, the next step is to specify dependent and independent variables. So this is also an important step, and some students make a mistake here. If you have wrongly, mistakenly made the dependent variable as independent variable, then all your hard work will be useless. So care should be taken here. In this case, we see that care should be taken to make the difference between dependent and independent variable, to specify which variable is the dependent variable. And usually we come to know about the dependent variable from the economic theory. We are interested here in the determinants of demand, so demand is dependent variable. So demand is a function of P, P naught, Y and T, which are independent variables. Similarly, we can have QD as a function of A, B, C, D, can be any other factors which can affect the demand. Signs and magnitude, you should also know that what is the expected sign, what is the magnitude, because the signs affect, the signs plays a key role in the determination of your decision. For example, in the quantity supplied, if we are taking the quantity supplied, then in this case we know that price and supply are positively related, so the expected sign is positive. While in case of the quantity demand, we know that price and demand are inversely related, so the sign, expected sign should be -1. Similarly, the next step in the specification of the model is the mathematical form of the model. We can use different mathematical forms of the model, and care should be taken while transforming the functional form into mathematical model, because sometimes if you made a mistake, and suppose that you have a you should have a linear equation of your model, and you have used exponential form, then definitely you have done a mistake, and your results will be not acceptable, will not be valid, will not be reliable. Similarly, if you use a model, the theory shows that the mathematical form of the model should be quadratic one, and you have used the exponential form, then you have also made a mistake. For example, in economics we see the Cobb-Douglas production function, which is of the exponential form. Cobb-Douglas production function. It is an exponential form, and usually sometimes the student make a mistake and use it in form of linear equations, so it is a mistake, and the results so derived will be will not be reliable and will be biased. The third step in the specification of the model is the estimation of the model. In estimation of the model also we have a few small steps which we should you should know about it. The first one is the collection of data, gathering of data. We know that we have, first of all, you should know that we have different types of the data. For example, first type is the time series data. The time series data give information about numerical values from period to period. This means the time series data is usually period to period data. This period to period data can be monthly, can be quarterly, can be biannual, can be annual, daily, weekly. For example, if we take the GDP data for Pakistan from 1990 to 2020, then it is a time series. It is annual data, the GDP in 1990, in 1991, 1992, 1993, 1994, till 2020. It is annual data, so it is a time series. And this data consists of observations of one or several variables over time. Time series are arranged in chronological order and can have different time frequencies such as biannual, annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, or hourly. Example of time series data can include stock prices, GDP, money supply, ice cream sale figures, among many others. The data for 10 years inflation data, 20 years inflation data, the stock exchange, the turnover data of the KC for 1 year. It is for 1 year, for 1 month is also a time series. The second type of the data is the cross-sectional data. These data give information on the variables concerning individual agents, consumers, producers at a given point of time. In other words, the cross-sectional data is data which is collected from at a point of time, and a good example is the sample family budgets. The third type of the data is panel data. Panel data is actually data which have characteristics of the cross-sectional as well as time series, which is time series as well as the cross-sectional. Panel data, sometimes referred to as longitudinal data, is the data that contains observations about different cross-sections across time. Examples of the groups that may make panel data series include countries, firms, individuals, demographics, groups. Like time series data, panel data contains observations collected at a regular frequency chronologically. Like the cross-sectional data, panel data contains observations across collection of individuals. A panel data set consists of time series for a cross-sectional member in a data set. As an example, we can consider the sales and number of employees for 50 firms over a 5-year period. We can take the simple example, the GDP data of the GDP for Asian countries from 1991 to 2020. Data of GDP of Asian countries from 1990 to 2020. It is a panel data set because we will have in 1990 we will have the GDP of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal. So it is a cross section. In 1991 we will have the same, 1992, 93, 94. So every year we will have cross-sectional data, cross-section of the countries. So, and we have also the period to period, 1990 to 2020. So it is a good example of panel data. Sometimes we use dummy variables. Dummy variables are also important concept. Dummy variables are used in those cases where we have the qualitative response. We have in the data set like male, female, like house ownership, owned, rented, like the education characteristic, educated, uneducated. So we use usually we use 0 and 1 if the response is binary. For example, in the case of the male female, usually we denote the male by 1 and the female by 0. So when you collect the data, if the respondent is male, you put in the data set 1. If the respondent is female, then you do write 0. So dummy variables are used for those where the variation is not variable directly. Examination of the identification conditions of the function, it is also very important in the estimation that we should identify, we should ensure that the model has been written in unique mathematical form. Examination of the aggregation problems of the function means that we know that many variables are aggregated. Many macro variables are the aggregation of the micro variables. So, for example, we can have aggregation over individuals. We know that GDP, the gross domestic product, is the summation of the individual incomes. Our total output is the sum of the individual firms. Similarly, aggregation over commodities, we have the aggregate supply, which is the summation of the individual supply of the individual firms. Aggregate demand, which is the summation of the demands of the consumers. In all these cases, we make aggregation. So care should be taken while in the aggregation of the variables, so that we may not do a mistake. If we have done a mistake, this means that we have misspecified the model. Aggregation over time periods. Similarly, we have aggregation over time period. In many cases, statistical sources publish data which refer to a time period different, longer or shorter than the unit time period required in the theory for functional relationship among economic variables. Sometimes in a research, any type of the research, you may need a data on the annual basis, and you may have quarterly data. So in that case, we aggregate the data to transform it into the annual data, or the monthly data into quarterly data, or daily data into monthly data. So all this is a non-aggregation, and care should be taken when aggregating the observations. Similarly, in the estimation of the model, examination of the degree of correlation among explanative variables. This is also an important step that we should, if you are using, especially if you are using the method of ordinary least square, then the correlation does matter in the explanative variables. And we know that in investment, consumption, exports, imports, income, employment, these are the economic variables. And we know that many economic variables move together over time. We know that the investment, consumption, exports, imports, income, employment, all these increase when there is boom in the economy, while they decrease while there is a recession in the economy. So they can be correlated. So care should be taken that to avoid the problem of multicollinearity, because one of the assumption of the OLS, which we are going to discuss in the coming lectures, is that the explanative variables should be independent. If the explanative variables are correlated, then we have the problem of multicollinearity. So care should be taken in it. Choice of appropriate economic technique, it is also depends on the nature of the theory, whether you are using the single equation technique or the simultaneous equation technique. If there is mutual dependence of the variables, then it is better to use the simultaneous equation technique, and if there is one-way relationship, then we can use the single equation technique. Dear student, the last step in the methodology of econometric research is the evaluation of estimates, and we use three types of the criteria for this purpose. One is the economic criteria. We check the results according to economic theory. We check the validity of the results according to the economic theory. For example, if you get the result of the quantity demanded is, we can say 9043 plus 0.56 p. Suppose this is the result of the quantity equation for demand. Here we have these, you can see the sign is plus, which shows that the price and the quantity demanded are positively related, which is which is against the economic theory. So if you have a result like this, then you can reject the result because the economic theory does not support it. In the statistical criteria, once you get suppose you got the result is this one, which shows that the price and quantity demanded are inversely related. If the price rises, the quantity demanded falls, and if the price falls, the demand increases. Means in negative relationship between price and demand, it is okay. It is okay according to according to economic theory. So after, if it is according to theory or it is not against the theory, then what we do here statistical tests for it. We test of significance. We have tests of significance for parameters. We use t-test, z-test, and error test, and we evaluate the validity of the results according to statistical criteria. The third criteria is the econometric criteria, in which we ensure that all the assumptions have been properly fulfilled. For example, one of the examples we discussed in the last slide, that was that we should you do not have the degree of correlation among the variables. If the variables are correlated, then we have done a mistake, and the assumption has been violated, because not the assumption of the OLS is that the explanatory variables are not perfectly linearly correlated. Similarly, if you have misspecified the model, then also we have an issue. So in the methodology of econometrics, the last step is evaluation of estimates, and we evaluate the estimates from 3 points of view: the economic criteria, the statistical criteria, and the econometric criteria. So this is end of the lecture. You can have reading to these books, the Gujarati Basic Econometrics, Korsiani's Theory of Econometrics especially. Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, our today's topic is the methodology of econometric research. It is lecture number 2 of Theory of Econometrics. In our last lecture, we discussed in detail the introduction to econometrics, and we explained the scope of econometrics with the help of a very simple example, in which we discussed the determinants of demand. We had taken different determinants of demand, like the price, price of substitute, income of consumer, and test, and we explained. Then we also explained it with the help of a sketch, that first a theory is presented, then it is transformed into a mathematical model, then data is confronted with it, and if the data support the data, then the theory, then we accept the theory, otherwise we reject it or we revise it. Today we are discussing the steps of the methodology of econometric research. We know that we discussed in our first lecture as well that the first step, an economic theory is presented. A theory is presented for which is then tested. For example, we are interested in finding the determinants of demand. It is our statement, or it is our theory, or determinants of supply. It is our theory, which we will discuss, which we will test. After the statement of the theory, as we discussed, the second step is the specification of the model. Dear students, the specification of model is very, very important step. It is the most important step in the methodology of economy. All the steps are important, but if you have made a mistake in the specification of the model, then this means that you will not get the appropriate results, the results which are reliable. By specification of the model, we mean to identify the variables of the study and to specify which one is the dependent variable and which are independent variables. And after defining the variables and dependent and independent variable, transformation of this theory into mathematical model is the specification of the model. So let's discuss the sub-steps of the specification of model one by one. First of all, we have the first step in the specification of the model is to specify the variables of the model. When a theory is presented, then we can get we specify the variables which can be included in the study. For example, if we are interested in the determinants of demand, we want to find the determinants of demand of our product, then we have a large number of variables. So first we specify the variables that the expected variables can be the quantity demanded, the price P naught, the price of substitute, Y the income, T the tests, W the weather conditions, Q the quality of product, L the location, etc. So there can be a large set of variables which can affect the demand. So sometimes it becomes very difficult for us to accommodate all variables. So in that case, we take the variables of our interest, means those variables which are important according to that theory, or in this case we will take those variables which are the most important determinants of expected determinants of demand. We have price, the price of the substitute, income, and tests. After the specification of the variables, the next step for the researcher is to specify the dependent and independent variables. If you look at these 5 variables, we know that the quantity demanded depends on price, price of substitute, income, and test. So the quantity demanded becomes the dependent variable, while the P naught, Y, and T, they become independent variables. So similarly, it is also important that we should know about the expected size and magnitude of the parameters, size and magnitude of parameters. This is also very important because a sign does matter. For example, let's see, this is a supply equation and this is a demand equation. By taking the same determinants, in this case we can see that in case of the supply, the sign of the price, the sign of the parameters of the price is positive, because we know that price and supply are positively related according to the law of supply, other things remaining same. So we have a positive sign. Similarly, in case of the demand, we know that the price and the demand are inversely related according to the theory of demand. So the sign of the parameter of the P should be negative, B1 should be negative. If it is negative, then we say that the model is okay, because the negative sign shows if the price increases, the demand falls, and if the price falls, demand rises, which is okay according to the law of demand. After the after the specification of the variables and specification of the dependent and independent variable and signs and magnitude, we transform the next step is the transformation of the theory into mathematical form. We can have a linear equation, we can have exponential, and we can have a quadratic model. So care should be taken to write the equation in appropriate mathematical form. The step number 3 in the methodology of econometric research is the estimation of model. In the estimation of the model, the first important sub-step is the gathering of data or collection of data. Here we will discuss only three types of the data: the time series data, cross-sectional data, and the panel data. First of all, we discuss the time series data. Dear students, time series data is actually period to period data, year to year, month to month, quarter to quarter, means the data on annual basis, the data on quarterly basis, monthly basis, weekly basis, daily basis are examples of the time series. For example, if you take the GDP data of Pakistan from 1990 to 2020, it will mean the GDP of Pakistan in 1990, GDP in 1991, GDP in 1992, GDP in 1993, GDP in 1994, 95 up to 2020. So it is the macro variable, and it is taken in on annual basis. So it is a time series. Similarly, time series can be the time series data can be biannual, it can be annual, it can be quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, or hourly. Because all hourly data, for example, if you take the stock exchange turnover for 1 week on hourly basis, then it forms, if the working of the stock exchange is 10 hours, then we have the almost, if 5 working days are there, then we have 50 observations. Because फर्स्ट फॉर एग्जांपल इसकी अगर जो टाइमिंग है वो 9 o'clock से स्टार्ट होती है, तो 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock जितना टर्नओवर है, फिर 10 to 11, 11 to 12, 13, 11 to then 1 o'clock, 1 to 2 to 3, तो ये अर्ली बेसिस पे. सिमिलरली अगर सेल्स हैं एंड यू वांट टू रिकॉर्ड द सेल्स ऑफ अ फर्म for 2 months on daily basis, then there are 30 observations, 60 observations. Similarly, we can have the data on weekly basis, monthly basis, or annual basis. In all these cases, the data is a time series. The second type of the data which we should discuss here, which we are going to discuss here, is the cross-sectional data, and it is the data which is collected at a point of time. Usually the surveys which you collect, the consumer surveys, the producer surveys, in which you collect the data from the field questionnaires from a cross-section of consumers, from a cross-section of producers at a point of time. Third data is the panel data. Panel data is that type of data which has the characteristics of the both type of the data, the time series data as well as the cross-sectional data. In other words, panel data is data for the data which is cross-sectional as well as the time series. So panel data, sometimes referred to as longitudinal data, is the data that contains observations about different cross sections across time. ये cross sections हैं over time हैं. Examples of that may make a panel data series including countries, firms, individuals, or demographic groups. Like time series, a panel data contains observations collected at a regular frequency chronologically. Like cross-sectional data, panel data contains observations across collection of individuals. A panel data consists of time series for each cross-sectional member in data set. As an example, we could consider the sales and the number of employees for 50 firms over a 5-year period. If you collect the 50 firms data, sales of the 50 firms for the last 5 years, we are having the panel data set. Or if we collect the GDP and money supply for a set of 20 countries for 20-year period, it is also a cross-section. For another example can be if we collect the GDP data of Asian countries from 1990 to 2020. 1990 to 2020 it is time series, and Asian countries is a cross-section, because in 1990 we will get the GDP of the Asian countries, for example Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, etc. and we will have in 1990 the GDP of these countries. Then so 1990 is a year, and the cross section is the Asian countries. In 1991, the cross section of the countries. In 1992, the cross section of the countries. So it is cross sectional as time series. So it is a panel data. It is a panel data. Similarly, sometimes we make use of the dummy variables. Dummy variables are used as proxies for those variables which are not directly measurable. For example, when we suppose you connect the data, so in case of the gender, male and female, so we usually represent the male by 1 and female by 0, so we put 1 for male and 0 for female. Similarly, educated and illiterate, 1 for educated and in 0 for illiterate. We will discuss the dummy variables in detail in hopefully after the final term. Examination of the identification conditions of the function. Similarly, it is also important that the mathematical form which you have given to the theoretical to the theory should be in the unique mathematical form. Examination of the aggregation problem of the function. We know that dear students, in many cases in the macro variables, we use macro variables which are actually the aggregation of the individuals को हम add up करते हैं तो हमारे पास जो है वो macro आता है. For example, aggregation over individuals. GDP, you know that GDP is the summation of the individual incomes. The individuals की income को हम add up करते हैं तो हमारे पास GDP आता है. Similarly, aggregation over commodities. अब aggregate supply है तो it is the supply summation of the it is the summation of output of individual firms in a country. So it is aggregate supply. Similarly, aggregate demand is the sum of the individual demands. Aggregation over time periods is another issue which we should keep in mind, and we should take special care in it, because sometimes the statistical sources, the organizations publish data in different forms, and possibly it may publish in data in the shorter form, for a shorter period, and you need for a longer period. Then we transform the shorter period into longer, or longer into the shorter. For example, we can change the monthly data into annual data. So proper care should be taken while transforming monthly data into the annual data, or monthly data into quarterly data, or semi-annual data. Examination of the correlation among explanative variables. We know that it especially occurs, this issue occurs during if you are using the economic variables, because a large number of economic variables are interrelated, they are correlated, they move together in some direction. For example, investment, consumption, exports, income, employment, all these variables, they tend to move upward. They increase in boom while they fall in the recession. So if you are using the OLS model, method of the ordinary square, then one of its assumption is that the explanative variables are not perfectly linearly correlated. ये assumption हम पढ़ेंगे next इंशाल्लाह next class में. So assumption, one of the basic assumption is that the explanative variables should not be correlated. If they are found correlated, जैसे अभी हमने इस example में पढ़ा ये correlate रहें तो then we will have a number of the econometric issues in the estimation. Choice of appropriate econometric technique. Similarly, when you use the mathematical form, it can be single equation technique or it can be simultaneous equation technique. Care should be taken in doing so, because if you see that the variables in the model are mutually dependent, then it is better to use the simultaneous equation. Mutual dependence अगर उनमें है, if it is there is no mutual dependence, then we can use single equation technique. The last step in the methodology of econometric research is the evaluation of estimates. Dear students, we use three different types of the criteria for this purpose: the economic criteria, the statistical criteria, and the econometric criteria. In the economic criteria, we check the results according to the economic theory. First of all, when you get the result, estimation result, we check the results according to the economic theory. For example, look at this estimation result where QD is 9023 minus 0.56p. Here, this result shows that the parameter of the coefficient of the price is negative, which means the price, according to this equation, the price and quantity demanded are negatively related, inversely related. Means according to this result, if the price increases, the demand will fall, and if the price falls, demand will increase. So it is okay according to the economic theory, because the law of demand says other thing remaining same. If the price rises, demand falls, and if price falls, demand rises. So the economic criteria recommends this result, approves this result. After the economic criteria, we check the result from statistical point of view, from statistical through statistical criteria. The statistical criteria, we check the significance of the parameters by using different tests. We know that we have different tests like T test, we have Z test, we have standard error test. So we check the significance of the parameters with the help of these tests, and if they are statistically significant, then they are approved according to the statistical criteria. The last criteria for the evaluation of the estimates is the econometric criteria. In the econometric criteria, we ensure that whether the assumptions of the method used are fulfilled or not. For example, if you are using the method of the ordinary least square, if you are using the OLS method, then its basic assumptions should be fulfilled. For example, one of the assumptions is that, as we discussed in this slide, that the explanative variables, if these are the explanative variables, then they should not be correlated. Thank you very much, students. This is the end of the lecture. You can give reading to these sources in order to get more details of this lecture.